This is Story Recapped. Today I'm going to explain a horror, sci-fi thriller film called The Last Days. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. As the sun rises in Barcelona, a software engineer named Marc Delgado stares at the view outside the office while his coworkers sleep. After taking his food ration from the canteen, Marc returns to the window to watch the burning buildings in the distance. Soon, a coworker approaches him to tell him that it's his turn to work in the basement. Upon reaching the car park, Marc notices that someone broke into a vehicle and stole the G.P.S. Soon, Marc helps his coworkers dig a tunnel out of the building. As he tries to break through a wall, dust falls from the ceiling, so his coworker, Lucas, asks him to stop because the ceiling might collapse. However, Marc continues ramming through the wall while thinking about seeing his girlfriend again. Finally, Marc smashes a hole into the wall, creating a path to the city's subway. While lining up for lunch, Marc notices a G.P.S. on a man's bag, so he follows him and asks him where he's going. Enrique discloses that he's going to Villa Olímpica. After revealing that he's going to Vertigar to find his girlfriend, Marc accuses him of stealing the G.P.S. from the car in the basement. To keep other employees from finding out, Enrique tells Marc to keep quiet so they can negotiate. When things were still normal at the office, Enrique was dubbed the Terminator because he was known for firing employees without pity. As Marc and Lucas were telling jokes about him, Enrique suddenly called Marc to his office. Enrique hinted that Marc could get fired if he didn't finish the company's security protocols soon. So Marc explained that he couldn't rush it because a simple mistake could be disastrous. Enrique reiterated his warning, so Marc promised to finish the protocols before the end of the month. Later that day, Marc called his girlfriend Julia to tell her that he couldn't make it to their date because he had to keep working. He advised her to have a drink with her coworker Andrea, but Julia preferred to wait for him at home. When Marc got home, he found Julia painting a toy panda. Julia showed him the toy and told him that she might not sell it at the shop because she wanted to keep it if they decide to have a baby. Marc noted that they can't raise a child yet because he's unsure if he can hold on to his job. Although he was tired from work, Marc could not sleep, so he got out of bed at 3 a.m. to watch TV. A news program revealed that about a dozen airports were closed because of the ash from the eruption of Mount Hekla. In another segment, a 16-year-old Canadian boy who had shut himself inside the house for months decided to kill himself while streaming it on video. Before shooting himself in the head, the boy complained that his father refused to believe him that he couldn't go outdoors. Marc went to work that morning and found his coworkers watching the news about the Canadian boy's death. As his office mates speculated about the boy's mental state, Marc noticed that his coworker, Rovira, seemed distressed. Rovira soon ran off and bumped into Lucas, who noticed that he'd been wearing the same suit for days. Back to the present, Enrique takes Marc into his office to ask him what he wants. Marc, who's been confined in the building for 3 months, notes that he needs a G.P.S. to find a way to his apartment and reunite with his girlfriend. Marc offers to give Enrique a flashlight and a small gas container after he takes him to Vertigar. When Enrique asks where he got the items, Marc reveals that they belong to Rovira. Enrique is not interested in his offer, but he relents when Marc threatens to tell the others about the stolen G.P.S. Soon, Marc says goodbye to Lucas and heads to the tunnels with Enrique. At a subway station, they come across many people trying to make a new home there. As they observe the chaotic situation, a boy suddenly grabs Enrique's bag. Marc and Enrique immediately chase after the boy since the G.P.S. is in the bag. The boy runs to his older brother, Javier, who's waiting behind the turnstiles with his friends. Marc explains to Javier that the boy stole their bag and they just want it back. Javier reveals that he's a cop and pulls out his gun to compel the pair to get on their knees. The boy soon discovers the G.P.S. in the bag and shows it to his brother. As Javier approaches them to take their other belongings, the power suddenly goes out across the city. Enrique attacks Javier and wrestles him for the gun, while Marc tackles the boy to take the G.P.S., but the device drops to the ground, causing the screen to crack. Marc grabs the G.P.S. and hides, while Javier's friends start shooting at him. As Enrique and Javier continue to fight over the gun, Enrique manages to pull the trigger while the firearm is pointed at Javier's head. The pair immediately flees from Javier's friends and runs back to the tunnels. Upon reaching an empty station, Marc turns on the GPS and learns that it still works despite the damaged screen. When Enrique asks him to hand over the device, Marc notices the gun in his hand and deduces that he will ditch him. Enrique, however, stresses that he intends to honor their deal. Marc first noticed that something was wrong in Barcelona when he checked on his neighbor a few months ago. When he found the door open, he entered and immediately noticed the stench and the numerous bags of trash all over the place. When he reached the kitchen, the tenant emerged and asked what he was doing there, while threatening to cut Marc's throat. Marc explained that he decided to check on him because he thought something had happened to him. When Marc asked how long he'd been in the apartment, the man revealed that he'd been shutting himself in for months because he was afraid to leave the building. Marc arrived at work later that day and learned that Rovira had been fired. Lucas told him that Rovira had been sleeping in the office for weeks and kept a stash of food in a cabinet. As the guards dragged Rovira to the lobby, he struggled and yelled that he couldn't go outside. Rovira held onto the door as the guards pulled him out of the building, but he eventually lost his grip. As soon as they got out of the building, Rovira started convulsing. Marc arrived and asked the guards to help him get Rovira back indoors. They managed to carry him back into the building, but Marc found out that he was already dead. When Marc returned home, he asked Julia if she noticed some closed shops and people not showing up for work. Julia noted that there were a few closed stores, but she pointed out that it's normal for a shopping mall. Marc told Julia that his coworker died of a heart attack while he was holding him in his arms. When Marc wakes up alone in the subway, he yells out an expletive, thinking that Enrique has abandoned him. But Enrique soon appears and tells him that he's keeping his word. Marc asks him why he wants to go to Villa Olímpica, but Enrique refuses to tell him. Soon, the pair enters a drain that leads to the sewers. After wading through wastewater, they eventually find themselves under Marc's building. Unable to get in, they place the gas container under a pipe and blow it up to create an entrance to the building. The explosion knocks Marc to the ground, but he remains conscious. When they get to Marc's apartment, they find that the doorknob has been dislodged. A man peeks through the hole and blocks the door, so Marc and Enrique use all their strength to break in. The stranger desperately tries to keep them out, but he falls back when Marc scratches his face. They fight off the stranger when they get inside, but a young girl soon comes out and begs them to stop. The girl explains that they broke into the apartment because they were afraid to go outside. Marc shows the family a picture of Julia and asks if they saw her, but they insist that the apartment was empty when they arrived. Marc and Enrique decide to stay for a while and look around. Enrique finds some corn and places it in the bag of seeds he's been collecting. In the study room, Enrique looks at the girl's artwork and notices that the paper comes from the gynecologist. When he looks at the back, he discovers an ultrasound indicating that Julia is pregnant. When the disease known as the panic started to spread worldwide, the Spanish government pleaded with the public to go on with their lives and keep working. On the news, Marc heard about several instances of women giving birth in dangerous conditions because they were afraid to go out. Marc remarked that they're imbeciles because they're still having babies during a calamity. Julia suddenly realized that Marc didn't want to have children, even when things were normal. Thinking that Marc had no intention to marry her, she locked herself in a room. Marc pleaded with her to come out and let him explain, but she refused, so Marc decided to go to work and left her crying in the room. The subway was mostly empty when Marc commuted that day, because many people now suffered from agoraphobia. When he reached the office, Marc called Julia to apologize, but Andrea answered the phone and told him that Julia didn't want to speak to him. Marc decided to come home to talk to Julia face to face, but as soon as he stepped outside, Marc suddenly felt lightheaded and disoriented, so he returned indoors. As Marc continues staring at Julia's ultrasound, it starts raining outside, so Enrique asks him to help gather some water. After filling some bottles with drinking water, Marc and Enrique leave the apartment to continue their journey. When they reach the sewers, Marc tells Enrique they must head to the mall to find Julia, but Enrique notes that they now have to go to Villa Olímpica because he's already completed his part of their deal. Marc reminds him that Julia is pregnant, but Enrique argues that she probably miscarried already if she's still alive. An altercation ensues, and they accidentally break the flashlight. After they stop fighting, Marc points out that he has a baby on the way and assumes that Enrique has no one waiting for him. However, Enrique reveals that he's going to the Del Mar hospital to be with his father, who had a stroke 3 months ago. Enrique notes that it's his turn to accompany him to the hospital and promises to give Marc the G.P.S. when they get there. Later, the pair stop by a church to find a flashlight. In the priest's office, Enrique finds a lighter and notes that they can use it to light a torch. While they're lighting a campfire, they hear a noise at the door, so they grab the spikes that Enrique made to defend themselves. Soon, a bear emerges and chases after them. When Enrique gets cornered by the bear, Marc contemplates leaving him behind, but he decides to help him. He stabs the animal and draws it away from Enrique. The bear walks toward Marc, so Enrique tries to scare it with the torch. As they back away, they realize that they're heading to the door that leads outside, so Marc tells Enrique to drop the torch. Soon, the bear lunges toward Marc, but it lands on his spike and dies. As they dine on the bear's remains, Enrique expresses his gratitude for not leaving him. He confesses that he was going to fire Marc despite his promise to finish the security protocols. Enrique then expresses regret that he never talked about important things with his father, and notes that the last thing they talked about was politics and soccer. Marc discloses that he told Julia that he didn't want children the last time they were together. Marc notes that he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to protect the child, and he is even more scared now because of the panic. Marc thinks that it might be the end of humanity, but Enrique once heard on the radio that nomadic tribes in Australia seem to be immune. When they return to the sewers, they come across a group of people on their way to Clinico Hospital. Marc notes that Del Mar Hospital is nearby, but the travelers share rumors that Del Mar burned in a fire. Enrique runs to a building and goes to an office space with a view of the city. Marc follows him and finds him staring at the burning hospital through the window. Realizing that his father couldn't have survived, Enrique smashes the glass with a chair and tries to jump, but Marc pulls him back. Marc convinces him to help him find Julia, but Enrique argues he no longer needs him because he's close to his destination. He gives Marc his seed collection and tells him to plant the seeds for his child. Marc soon parts ways with Enrique and heads to the mall. While walking to the toy store, 3 figures watch him from the 2nd floor, but they disappear when he turns around. When Marc reaches the store, he sees an elderly woman's corpse on the floor. He then finds a note from Andrea on the mirror, telling her mother that she's in the supermarket. When Marc goes to the supermarket, he encounters other survivors who turn him away. A man aiming a bow and arrow at Marc tells him that they don't have food for him, but Marc notes that he's there to find his girlfriend. Marc pulls out Julia's picture, but the man tells him that they haven't seen her. The man discourages him from checking upstairs, noting that the people there are less understanding. When Marc mentions that his girlfriend is pregnant, a girl notes that there's a pregnant girl inside, so the man asks her to check. As Marc waits, people covered in black paint attack the survivors at the supermarket. Marc climbs over the barriers and calls out to Julia as the survivors fight off the raiders. Marc soon comes across Andrea, who tells him that Julia was headed to the gynecologist when they parted ways. Marc and Andrea head toward a door to find a way out of the supermarket, but burning debris falls between them. When Andrea opens the door, she discovers that it leads outside. Marc urges her to set foot outside because it's safer, but Andrea hesitates. Suddenly, more debris falls from the ceiling, instantly killing Andrea. As Marc attempts to flee, someone tackles him and tries to stab him, but Enrique arrives to stop the attacker. Enrique shoves him away, but the assailant returns and stabs him. Enrique almost impales the assailant, but he realizes that he's just a boy, so they leave him. When they reach the car park, Marc tells Enrique that Julia might be at the gynecologist. Marc sees Enrique wincing in pain, so he tries to check if he's injured, but Enrique claims that he's fine. The duo returns to the sewers to find the gynecologist's clinic. Soon, they come across an opening that leads to a cinema. Marc discovers that the gynecologist's office is across the street, but he can't reach it because the tunnel is blocked. Marc heads upstairs to get a closer look and finds Julia sitting by the window, so he yells out her name until Julia looks in his direction. Julia breaks out in laughter as soon as she sees Marc. Soon, Marc returns to Enrique to tell him that he found Julia, but he learns that he's already dying from his wound. Marc tries to patch him up, but Enrique points out that he can't stop the bleeding. Enrique urges him to cross the street because his family is waiting for him. He tells Marc not to worry because he is already at peace with dying, knowing that he's there by his side. After Enrique passes away, Marc musters the courage to cross the street while Julia waits on the other side. He staggers and starts bleeding from the ears as he walks toward Julia. As he gets closer, he imagines chasing Julia in the woods. Marc falls to the ground, not knowing if he reached the building, but he realizes that he made it when Julia approaches him and caresses his face. Months later, Marc assists Julia while she gives birth at the gynecologist's clinic. The family survives on the plants they grew from Enrique's seeds. When the boy learns to walk, Marc allows him to set foot outside. He's delighted to learn that the boy doesn't suffer from the panic like his parents. Their son, Enrique, soon grows into a teen and meets other children who have no fear of the outdoors. Soon, Marc and Julia have to kiss him goodbye so he can explore the world with other kids.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this. Turn on notifications. And leave a like, it really helps the channel out. Thank you for watching.